Australia, the land of the fair go. Remember those days? The place where hard work meant a fair share of the pie? Where if you put in the effort, you'd see the rewards? Well, that place is officially dead.
It's gone.
We've traded fairness for greed, turned housing into a speculative investment game like a lottery for the rich. And who are the real winners in all of this? It's the ones who are able to play the system and cash in on the most generous tax breaks in the entire world. But what about those hardworking Australians who can no longer afford their own home? Well, they're left fighting over the scraps while the rich keep stacking up their millions. We're speeding headfirst into a two-tier wealth society deliberately engineered by Australia's housing policy. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Why don't boxers have sex the night before a fight? Because they don't really like each other. And why don't you like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already? Who else would you rather keep you up to date on all the big economic stuff like the housing market? Now, how have we gone from giving a fair go to all Australians to now where we give a fair go to some Australians and a giant middle finger to everyone else? Today, I'm going to focus on this report titled Widening the Gap, Worsening Wealth Inequality in Australia. Australians have long believed that ours is an egalitarian country. An egalitarian society believes in the notion that people receive a fair share based on their own efforts. So for example, if somebody works harder for a long period of time, they would expect to receive more financial compensation than someone else that wasn't working as hard. And I think that's how Australians thought of their own country for many, many years. However, that belief is weakening significantly as inequalities in both income and wealth have grown substantially. Now, in an egalitarian society, having a large disparity between the wealthy and the not wealthy is not a bad thing as such, because you have people who work harder, maybe take more risks, maybe get lucky. That's all part of a society where you're rewarded based on the actions you take. Regarding wealth, if you make good financial decisions consistently over time, you'll tend to grow wealth. But on the other hand, if you make bad financial decisions consistently, you'll most likely struggle financially. So we don't just want everyone to have the same wealth outcome, because that doesn't reward putting in extra effort. But we do want a system that gives a fair go to all Australians, no matter where they start, rather than our current system we have now that massively benefits those who are already wealthy, and most of that wealth has been grown from owning Australian property. Now, what's the impacts of wealth inequality that's generated from an unfair system? It limits opportunities for people from less wealthy backgrounds, entrenches generational poverty, erodes trust in institutions, and undermines social cohesion. Now, taken to its full conclusion, it can lead to total societal breakdown. And this is what occurred during the French Revolution. You had massive wealth inequality, corruption at the highest level, and extreme economic hardship for much of the population. The report believes that the current state of unfairness in Australia is a direct result of government policies that have supported some to build wealth while making it more difficult for others to get ahead. They believe the biggest contributors to this widening of the wealth inequality gap has been from government policies to boost superannuation for the wealthiest households and those that promote investment in property. Today, I'm going to specifically focus on the housing policies that are slowly destroying this country. In the past, those who earned higher incomes generally accrued more amounts of wealth, but slowly and then increasingly fast over time, individual wealth was more closely aligned to how much property your family owned. This has led to the shockingly unfair scenario where someone can work very little and put very minimal effort in, but because their parents own a lot of property, they'll end up doing much better financially than someone who works their ass off, but won't be inheriting a large amount of assets. Over time, this leads to disillusionment and large sections of the community simply just giving up. Because what's the point of working hard and still being in hardship when you see others doing the minimal and thriving financially due to owning assets that are subject to the most generous tax deductions in the entire world? Now let's just check out Australia's household wealth figures. During the 90s, household wealth was actually growing quite slowly. But then in the 2000s, it really started ramping up. That sharp rate of increase continued, and recently the chart's actually looking parabolic, going nearly vertical. Now, if we look at a long historical graph of Australian house prices, we can see that house prices adjusted to inflation were basically flat from the 1880s all the way through until around about the 1950s. Then house prices clearly started outperforming inflation all the way up until the 2000s, but just look what happened after that. House prices got injected with steroids and then they went ballistic. So recently, total Australian household wealth has reached a record of over 16 trillion. But very significantly, 11 trillion of that overall wealth is directly from property assets. That means that residential property counts for a staggering 70% of total net household wealth. And this is up from 61.7% in just December 2020. So it's very, very clear that Australians have gotten wealthy from ridiculous house price growth. But the sad reality of this housing bubble is that those who don't own property have been left behind financially and will most likely continue to struggle unless there's some major policy changes. According to the report, a major reason for Australia's current unfairness is a tax system which privileges speculative investment in housing and other assets that increase in value more than productive investments. Over the past 2 decades, negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions have played a key role in shaping these economic inequalities and fueling housing costs. Capital gains tax discount has been in place since 1999, and what it does is give a 50% discount on any capital gains tax payable for an asset that you've held for over 12 months. So just say you've held an investment property for over 12 months and realize a 200,000 capital gain when you go to sell that property, then you only have to pay tax on half the actual capital gain. So in this case would be 100,000. So by halving the tax payable on capital gains, you're effectively paying less tax than a wage earner pays on their income earned. So this capital gains tax discount overwhelmingly benefits wealthy people because they can buy way more assets and hold them for longer periods. So there's nothing wrong with being wealthy and buying assets, but the capital gains tax discount basically draws investors to property like flies to shit. Because why would you invest in anything else when you can leverage the most amount of money into property, hold it for just 12 months, and then be able to take advantage of an unbelievable tax concession when you go to sell that property? Another policy that's destroyed the housing market is negative gearing. Negative gearing allows investors to offset property losses against their other income, which reduces their overall tax burden. This is a strategy that's used overwhelmingly by high-income earners because it helps them buy more property, but it's also a tax avoidance strategy. In most other countries like the United States, for example, property investors are very concerned on the income return that they receive from an investment because that will greatly impact whether or not they're able to afford that property. But in Australia, wealthy individuals don't even have to care how much income they're getting from an investment because any loss they make on their investment can be used to reduce their taxable income, thus rewarding them with a tax bonus. This is how absurd the current Australian housing policies are. You lose money on a property investment and you get rewarded for it. You hold that investment for over 12 months and you get another reward. So a plethora of rewards for people who own property, but what does everyone else get? Jack! Shit! Now, on top of these over-generous tax concessions, there's no capital gains tax payable on your principal place of residence. So that means the home that you own, no matter how much it increases in value, you'll never have to pay any capital gains tax when you go to sell it. Now, this seems like a logical policy because if you were to sell your own home to go buy another one, if you were slugged with capital gains tax, you may not be able to afford to get back into the market. However, for me, it's only a fair policy if the majority of Australians can afford their own home. Because if everyone can afford their own home, then everyone can take advantage of the policy. But now that Australia has blown up one of the biggest housing bubbles in history, millions are locked out of being able to own their own home, so they're completely unable to take advantage of this ultra generous tax concession. And that, my friends, is completely unfair because those people are getting slugged with ridiculous rent prices, out of control cost of living, and have to pay all this after they've been slugged with ultra high tax rates from their income. So on one hand, they miss out on all the benefits, and on the other hand, they're getting royally shafted. Now, it's the combined impact of all these policies together that create the real problem. You've got capital gains tax discount, negative gearing, and no capital gains tax on your principal place of residence. All of that combined creates unbelievable massive speculation into property, and this speculation creates so much demand that it causes house prices to rise way faster than wages. And every year that this occurs, housing becomes more and more unaffordable. But it also means that those who do own property, whether you own your own home or whether you own investment properties, your assets are increasing, you're getting tax concessions, and this enables you to buy more property. You know, in Mario Brothers, when you eat something, you become massive and then you can do so much more. Well, that's like property owners in Australia. You get all the benefits of tax concessions, you get massive speculative demand that shoots the value of your properties upwards, and that allows you to invest into more and more properties, making your wealth rise exponentially. And while that's happening, it's getting harder and harder for a first home buyer just to be able to afford their own home. And that's why the wealthiest Australians now own 90 times the wealth of those with the least, fed by the most generous tax breaks in the world for housing investments, including capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. The executive director of the report, Miss Chambers, warned that the federal experiment with housing as a wealth generator rather than a basic need had failed. And when experiments fail, you'd normally stop them and try something else, but not in Australia. And there's a very sinister reason why. 95% of Australian federal politicians own property, and out of that, the top 15 own a whopping 88 properties combined. Will Australian politicians keep pushing this broken experiment, driving us towards an unfair society where hard work means nothing? Or will they finally prioritise housing as a basic right for all Australians? I'm Biko Konstantinos.